Secretary of State Victoria Nuland to Joe Biden himself. Senator Ron Johnson, in questioning Nuland, appeared to actually call for the sabotage of the pipeline.
But I'm literally talking about rolling back the pipeline. You can loosely define that, but I mean taking action that will prevent it from ever becoming operational.
And so who do you think is responsible for the worst act of industrial sabotage in recent memory and maybe in long memory? And what would their motive be, considering that the German economy was on the hook here?
I've said I wasn't there, but my guess is, just like I think Ukraine is shelling the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, I think the United States blew up Nord Stream. And they told us. Biden said it in February, said if Putin invades, Nord Stream is over. And then a reporter said, well, what do you mean, Mr. President? How are you going to do that? He said, we have our ways. We have our ways.
We will bring an end to it.
But how will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Come on. Who controls the airspace? Who monitors the airspace? Who has the means to do this? Who said we're going to do it? Who said afterwards, this is a tremendous opportunity, this new situation, a tremendous opportunity to permanently wean Europe from Russian gas? That would be Secretary of State Blinken. Who said, thank you, USA, tweeting a picture of the burst pipeline? That would be Radek Sikorski, former foreign minister of Poland. And by the way, I've been in touch with reporters in papers that say we don't know, or even worse, who say Russia did this. And then I talk to very senior reporters, and they say, Jeff, of course it's the U.S. What do you think? But it doesn't get into our news. My guess is that we're going to hear from Europe's investigators in a week or so. Very hard. We don't know. Trail went cold. Very hard to tell. We'll keep looking, but we don't know. But terrible blow, terrible blow. That would be consistent with the U.S. doing it. And the fact that things went a bit quiet after this, rather than parliamentarians throughout Europe demanding our core infrastructure was blown up, tells me that they're told, keep it quiet, keep it quiet. We don't really want to know exactly what happened. So I can't prove this, but it sure does, to my mind, put all the suspicion on the U.S. side. Warnings, motive, capability, subsequent behavior, strange statements. To my mind, it adds up. I don't think Russia would blow up its core infrastructure. That doesn't make sense. And anyone else that did it would, with Poland or Denmark or anyone else, that would be NATO, that would be with the U.S.
President Joe Biden has said, Professor Sachs, that there will be an investigation into what he has deemed an act of deliberate sabotage. He said he'll send divers down, which is interesting because he knows that divers can reach it. But do you think that this investigation will be a whitewash like the kind we saw the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons carry out, where inspectors were actually censored and even attacked by OPCW leadership around the Duma Syria chemical weapon attack allegations in April 2018? And what do you make specifically of that allegation? My colleague here, Aaron Mate, has done as much to expose the cover-up as anyone, so it's a real issue of interest here.
Well, on this, the pipeline, the U.S. can't be the one investigating if the U.S. is the most likely culprit. I mean, they can, but we're not going to find any credibility in what comes out of this. So I think the idea of an independent and transparent investigation would be great, but I'm not holding my breath. So the U.S. may say something. Again, I'm 67 years old. took me a long time to grow up to know that almost everything we hear is not true. We are a security state. We have a secret state, which runs most of our foreign and military policy, of course, and we don't hear the real thing. So I'm not putting too much stock in what the U.S. comes up with. I'm a little more curious about what the Europeans say. It's their infrastructure, after all. It's their economy. It's their gas pipeline. And you would think that they might be interested in actually knowing. But what's also true is that if they do find out or they do know, which I presume they do, they're not speaking also because, the U.S. they think is their security umbrella. I think the U.S. is the great provocation that threatens Europe just about as much as anything right now. So I don't know if we'll ever find out the truth, but frankly, there are so many issues that we never find out the truth about because we never really look. And when you have a state based on secrecy and impunity and, like in Love Story, never having to say you're sorry, the CIA doesn't say, oh, we made a mistake, so sorry, let's have a careful review of what we've done. We're not going to find out about Syria. We're not going to find out about this, not from the U.S. at least. On Syria and the chemical weapons, I listen to you guys. I'm not enough of an expert or inside to know, but what I do know as a very basic point, the U.S., of course, really instigated the war in Syria in 2011. It was the plan, like 100 times before, to overthrow Assad. President Obama signed a presidential finding to task the CIA to work with Saudi Arabia and others to overthrow Assad. This was Operation Timber Sycamore. What is amazing to me about the whole thing is that there's almost not been any coverage, review, explanation of this. We heard only this is a civil war. That's what we heard again and again. And then we hear even more extraordinarily, Putin intervened in Syria. Look what the Russians have done. Putin intervened years after the U.S. took action to overthrow Russia's ally. But we can't get this story told. I think the New York Times covered Operation Sycamore one day, if I remember, something around 2016. Nothing beforehand, nothing after. And I knew a lot about this in those years at the time because I knew what was happening through diplomatic channels and so forth. It was like reality here, weirdness of our mainstream media here, and a narrative that was completely devoid of facts for years. And newspapers that are, of course, absolutely counter-informative.
Quick question on Ukraine before we move on to other topics. What do you think guides the U.S. officials who are overseeing the current policy? I mean, we had someone like Lindsey Graham recently say that as long as the U.S. arms Ukraine, they will fight to the last person.
4 months into this thing, I like the structural path we're on here. As long as we help Ukraine with the weapons they need and the economic support, they will fight to the last person.
Do you think that's the prevailing mentality right now? And why are they so determined to sacrifice Ukraine in this war against Russia?
And if I could piggyback on that question, Professor Sachs, since you mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis and your understanding of it, throughout the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Kennedy